The church fell silent after the groom saw his bride without makeup for the first time. Then he collapsed beside the altar, whispering a name nobody inside the wedding was prepared to hear. Rosalie froze, one trembling hand still covering the left side of her face. The makeup wipes lay scattered near the bridal room mirror beside her. And for several terrifying seconds, nobody moved. Not the bridesmaids, not the pastor, not even Damien. The groom stared at her as though he had just seen a ghost. His face had completely lost color, breathing uneven, eyes locked on the scars stretching softly across Rosalie's cheek, neck, and jawline. The room became painfully quiet. Rosalie immediately stepped backward, because suddenly, the moment she feared her entire life had finally arrived. Before we start, if you love powerful African stories, filled with emotion, mystery, and real-life lessons, then make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Are you watching from the United States, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, South Africa, or somewhere else entirely? I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now, let's begin. Damien looked horrified, not disgusted, horrified, and somehow, that reaction hurt even more. "Oh my God," one bridesmaid quickly whispered. Rosalie's chest tightened instantly. For years she avoided moments exactly like this. No swimming pools, no bright morning light, no photographs without makeup, no mirrors near strangers. And most importantly, no man had ever seen her real face long enough to stay. Until Damien, at least. That was what she believed. Father Monroe slowly stepped forward from the chapel doorway. "Damien," but the groom barely heard him, because all he could see now was fire. Smoke, a collapsing staircase, and a terrified little girl screaming for help through flames 15 years earlier. Damien staggered backward suddenly, his breathing becoming worse. Rosalie immediately misunderstood the reaction. Of course she did. Every scarred person understands rejection before words arrive. "I knew this was a mistake." Her voice broke softly, tears immediately filling her eyes. One bridesmaid moved awkwardly toward her, but Rosalie stepped away quickly. Humiliation had already started swallowing her whole. Damien suddenly grabbed the edge of the wall beside him, then whispered a sentence that froze the entire room. "Clara?" Father Monroe's expression changed instantly. Not confusion, fear, real fear. Rosalie slowly looked up. "What did you just say?" Damien stared at the scars again, his eyes trembling now. Because suddenly, he remembered exactly where he had seen them before. Not on a bride, not inside a church, but inside a burning house 15 years ago, on the girl he thought died in the fire. Rosalie Mensah had been hiding her face for 15 years. Not because she was ashamed of who she was, but because the world had taught her, very early and very efficiently, that burned scars make people uncomfortable. And Rosalie had spent the better part of 2 decades quietly managing that discomfort on everyone else's behalf. Every morning, the routine was the same. 30 minutes at the vanity mirror, a specific sequence of products applied in a specific order, building coverage layer by layer until the scars stretching across her left cheek, her neck, and the curve of her jaw were completely invisible. Then she would look at herself in the mirror, and Rosalie would be ready to face the world. She had become extraordinary at it. The kind of skill that impresses professional makeup artists and confuses dermatologists. Not because she cared about beauty standards, but because the alternative, the uncovered version of her face, produced a reaction in strangers that she had come to find unbearable. There was a sequence to it. Always the same. A second and a half of micro-expressions crossing a stranger's face before they arranged themselves into whatever polite performance they had decided was appropriate for the occasion. Pity. Discomfort. The flicker of something that sat too close to revulsion to be completely distinguished from it. Then the performance. Rosalie had memorized every variation of the performance over 15 years. The grocery store woman who looked too long and then looked away too quickly. The man on the bus who became suddenly very interested in the window. The children, always honest children, who simply asked, "What happened to your face?" and waited for the answer while their mothers turned the color of shame. 30 minutes every morning, and the sequence never happened. So Rosalie took the 30 minutes. Every day. For 15 years. Without exception. Without variation. Without a single morning off. It had cost her more than she had ever calculated until this morning, when it was over. The morning of her wedding, she had been awake since 4. Not from nerves. Rosalie had planned every detail of this day with the focused, methodical precision of someone whose anxiety had, over many years, been successfully redirected into competence. The venue, the flowers, the caterers, the timeline, the seating arrangement, the backup seating arrangement for when the first one inevitably required adjustment, all of it managed, all of it controlled. She had been awake because of the rain. It had started just after 3 in the morning, light at first, then heavier. The kind that comes in off the coast and settles in with the clear intention of staying all day. Rain. Specifically, the heavy, driving, thunderstorm kind that smells of wet earth and electricity, had been a trigger for Rosalie since the night of the fire. Not a dramatic trigger. She did not panic at the sound of it. She did not have episodes or crises or the kind of visible distress that requires management by other people. It simply made her quiet. And quiet, for Rosalie, meant remembering things she had spent 15 years learning to hold at a careful, managed distance. She lay in the hotel suite, listening to the rain crash against the window, and she thought about her mother. About the piano at St. Mark's Church. About the green cardigan and the third Sunday of every month, and the way Elizabeth's back straightened when the congregation fell silent before she began. She thought about Ashcroft Lane. She thought about Lily. And then she stopped thinking about Lily, because Lily was the stove she had learned not to touch. Present, always there, past every day, but the last burn had taken years to heal. By 6, Rosalie was at the vanity in the hotel bathroom, makeup bag open, mirror lit properly. The 30-minute routine beginning in its reliable, exact sequence. She was 3/4 done when Priya knocked and the bridal morning officially started. The bridal room was everything she had asked for. Warm light from the tall church windows, white roses along the windowsill. The playlist Nadia had spent 6 months building, playing softly from a portable speaker in the corner. Nadia, who moved toward difficulty instead of away from it, stood near the window. Jasmine worked at the back buttons on Rosalie's dress with focused patience. Bia hid 2 sleepless nights behind careful mascara. Priya was already emotional, because Priya was always emotional, even at engagement announcements. And through all of it, Rosalie's makeup sat perfectly on her face, coverage complete, left side invisible. The version of her face that the world was permitted to see, firmly in place. It was Priya who knocked the bag over. She reached across the vanity for her lipstick, and her elbow caught the edge, and the entire bag went off the counter and hit the tile floor, and the compact inside shattered. Foundation powder exploded across the white stone like something violent and deliberately done. 6 women scrambling, laughing, apologizing, reaching in every direction at once. And in the chaos, someone grabbed the wrong wipe from the wrong stack. Rosalie felt it before she understood what was happening. The cool dampness dragging across the left side of her face. Her hand flew up, but it was already too late. Half her face was uncovered. The burn scars, which had not been seen by anyone in this room, which had not been seen by anyone outside a hospital in 15 years, were showing. The bridal room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when everyone present understands that something has gone wrong, but nobody wants to be the first person to react to it. Rosalie stood in her wedding dress, one hand covering what the wipe had uncovered, heart already preparing for what came next. And then the door opened, and Damien walked in. Damien was not supposed to see Rosalie before the ceremony. They had discussed this. He had laughed at the superstition and called it beautiful nonsense. She had agreed it was nonsense, and she had never told him the real reason she wanted to observe it anyway. The real reason was standing in the bridal room right now with one hand pressed against her face and 15 years of dread arriving all at once. The real reason was that seeing her before the ceremony meant a risk, that the makeup might not be perfect, that the light might be wrong, that something might happen. Something exactly like this. Damien stood at the threshold with both hands slightly raised. He was not moving. He was not speaking. His face had gone through a sequence that Rosalie had never seen before on any person's face in 15 years of watching for the sequence. Not pity, not discomfort, not the polite performance of someone managing their reaction. Something older. Something that looked like a man surfacing from very deep water. The face of someone who has been holding their breath for 15 years and has just broken the surface and cannot determine whether they are relieved or completely terrified by what the air feels like. He staggered slightly. His right hand found the doorframe. His breathing became irregular. And Rosalie, who had her armor ready and her exit line prepared and 15 years of practice managing exactly this moment, Rosalie misread it completely. She saw horror on his face, and she called it rejection. Because that is what 15 years of hiding teaches a person to do. It trains the eye to see threat where there may be something else entirely. It makes rejection feel like the only possible interpretation of a man who stops breathing at the sight of you. I knew this was a mistake. Her voice broke on the last word. She stepped backward. Nadia moved toward her immediately, arm extended, that quiet lateral placement of herself between Rosalie and whatever was coming. But Rosalie was already building the wall. And then Damien opened his mouth. And what came out was not the thing she was braced for. It came out quietly, as though it had escaped him without his permission. As though 15 years had been a dam, and the dam had developed, this morning, a crack it could not hold against. Clara. The room stopped. The music kept playing, the candles kept burning, the light kept coming through the windows. But the room stopped. Because that name had not been spoken in any room where Rosalie was present in 15 years. That name belonged to a girl who was supposed to be dead. That name was the one thing she had buried so completely and so deliberately that she had occasionally gone entire weeks without thinking of it. And Damien, the man she had spent 3 years with, the man she had allowed closer than anyone since the fire, the man she had loved slowly and carefully, the way you love things you know are fragile, had just spoken it, in her voice, from his memory, which meant they were connected. Not the sweet, romantic, we were meant to find each other kind of connected. The fire, the hidden identity, the burn scars, the 15 years of secret. The fire. Father Monroe appeared in the doorway behind Damien. He stepped inside. He looked at Damien's face. And what Rosalie saw on the pastor's face in that moment was not confusion. It was the expression of a man who has been dreading a specific moment for a very long time and has looked up to find it standing directly in front of him. He closed the chapel doors. The click of the latch in the silence was the loudest thing in the room. Rosalie looked at him. You knew who I was. Not a question, a recognition. The pastor sat down. To understand what happened inside that bridal room, it is necessary to go back 15 years. Back to a quiet street in a small city. Back to a house that no longer exists, on a street called Ashcroft Lane. Elizabeth Adeze had lived in that house for 11 years before the fire. She had raised 2 daughters there alone. She had put herself through a paralegal certification at night school while managing the household on a single income. She had the particular focused patience of a woman who understood that the world moved slowly but moved nonetheless, and who had learned to work within that slowness without being broken by it. In the 3 years before the fire, Elizabeth's patience had been directed at a specific injustice. Several families on Ashcroft Lane and the surrounding streets had been subjected to a systematic campaign of legal and financial pressure. The goal, as Elizabeth had documented meticulously over the course of a year, was to remove them from their land before a major construction project received formal approval from the local authority. The developers wanted the land. The families had lived on it for decades, and the documents Elizabeth had assembled, cross-referenced, verified, organized into the kind of coherent legal argument that is difficult to dismiss, proved the acquisition process had involved fraud. Forged signatures, falsified valuations, legal complaints buried at the filing stage, a pattern repeated across multiple properties that could not be explained as coincidence. She was 3 days from walking into a courthouse when the fire started. Clara was 16 years old on the night of the fire. This was the name Rosalie was born with, the name she had been given and had lived under for 16 years, and had then carried into a burning house and, in the version of events that everyone who survived had agreed to present to the world, left behind in the ashes. Clara Ades Ose, 16 years old, living on Ashcroft Lane with her mother and her sister. Her sister was 9. Her name was Lily, and on the night the fire started, Lily had found Clara in her bedroom as the storm began. She climbed into the bed, and Clara made her the promise she always made her. "I'll never let anything happen to you." And Lily believed her. She always believed her. The smoke started just after midnight. Lily woke first. She shook Clara's arm. She was coughing. Clara opened the bedroom door and the hallway was already orange. The staircase was burning from the bottom. The corridor to their mother's room was gone. Clara took Lily's hand and moved toward the window. She got it open. She looked at the drop below. Survivable. She turned to lift Lily through. The ceiling section between them, weakened by fire moving through the roof space, came down. A panel of burning material that swung as it fell. It hit Clara across the left side of her face. She lunged for Lily through the smoke, felt her fingers close around her wrist, and then arms came through the window, from outside. Strong arms, a neighbor who had climbed up from the garden, and those arms grabbed Clara and they pulled. Clara fought them with everything she had. She fought until the smoke was inside her lungs, and Lily's wrist was slipping, and her body had made its own decision without her permission. And then she was on the grass in the rain, screaming her sister's name, and the burning house was above her, and Lily was still inside it. The fire services arrived 8 minutes after they should have. Nobody explained this at the time. Clara woke in a burns unit 2 days later. Her mother was not there. A woman she did not recognize sat beside the bed. She held Clara's hand and told her things in a very quiet voice, and she did not let go until the words had been fully received. Lily was gone. Her mother had not come out. The woman holding her hand was Damien's mother, Margaret. But Clara would not know this for 15 years. She only knew that the woman was there, that she stayed, that her hands were steady, and that steady hands are worth more than most things in the moments when you are receiving news that will rearrange the architecture of the rest of your life. 3 weeks later, Clara left that city with her aunt. A decision had been made in a room she was not present in by adults who believed they were protecting her. Clara Ose was dead. The girl leaving the city would be Rosalie Mensa. The scars would be covered when they healed. The name would be protected. And the reason, the danger still active, the powerful people her mother had been building a case against, would remain buried until it was safe to do otherwise. Clara had been 17. She had just survived a house fire. She had lost her mother and her sister in a single night. She said yes to everything. She became Rosalie. And Clara rested. Damien Ose Asante had lived next door to the Ose house the year of the fire. He was 15. His bedroom window looked toward the house on Ashcroft Lane. On clear evenings when the curtains were open, he could see lights moving through the living room, a woman, a teenage girl, a small child, once or twice, in the garden. He had not known their names. They were simply the family next door. The night of the fire began for Damien with his father's voice. He had been asleep and was woken by the phone call downstairs, his father shouting at first. Then quiet, the careful quiet of a man managing a panic he cannot afford anyone to witness. Damien came to the top of the stairs. He heard fragments through the door. This was never supposed to include people. Get them out. Go back and get them out right now. God help you if that child doesn't make it out. Then Damien went to his window and saw the orange light. He grabbed his phone. He had it open. He was already pressing dial, and his father appeared behind him and took the phone from his hand. Not violently, carefully, with the specific deliberateness of a man making a terrible calculation in real time and arriving at the wrong answer. Firefighter coming, put that down. They were not coming. No call had been made. Damien knew this in the way 15-year-olds know when adults are lying to protect themselves. He could feel the wrongness in his body before his mind had caught up with it. But he was 15, his father's hand was on his shoulder, and the authority of that hand had a weight he had not yet built the muscle to push against. So he stood at the window, and he watched, and what he heard, before a neighbor across the street finally called the fire services themselves, before the sirens started coming, was a child's voice from the upper floor of the burning house, screaming a name. Clara. 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 The fire services arrived 8 minutes after they should have. Damien's father never spoke about that night. What he did instead was drink. Slowly. Methodically. The kind of drinking that is not about pleasure or sociability, but about maintaining a specific, precise level of distance between a person and their own memory. The kind that eventually becomes indistinguishable from the illness it was trying to prevent. His business collapsed. The development project he had been connected to unspooled under investigation. The man at the center of it, Victor Hale, disappeared before the hearings concluded. Damien's father died 7 years after the fire. Organ failure, said the death certificate. Guilt, said the son who had sat at his bedside and waited for a door to open and watched it stay closed until the end. Damien had not consciously connected his father's decline to the fire. He had tried not to connect it to anything. He had buried the night of the fire the way people bury things they cannot afford to look at directly. Not by forgetting them, because those things refuse to be forgotten, but by learning to move around them. By building a daily life that did not require direct contact with the buried thing. He had built a career, relationships, a life that looked from the outside, like the life of a man who had processed his past and moved forward. He had not processed it. He had managed it. There is a significant difference. And on the morning of his wedding, standing in the doorway of a bridal room, looking at the scars on the left side of his bride's face, the buried thing came up. All at once. 15 years of it. Surfacing through the floor of a morning that had been supposed to be nothing but good. Father Monroe told them what he knew. He told it in the careful, measured way of a man who has rehearsed a confession many times over many years without knowing exactly when he would be called to give it, and has arrived at the moment to find it both more and less difficult than he had expected. He had been the pastor of this church for 23 years. He had married hundreds of couples in this chapel. He had baptized children, buried the dead, sat with grief in every form that human beings produce it. He was, by any measure, a man who knew how to hold other people's heaviest things. He had recognized Rosalie the first time Damien brought her to the church. The scars. The careful way she held herself. The slight, practiced angle away from direct light that burn scar survivors develop without always being aware that they have developed it. And her name, even Rosalie, even now, at 31, had something of Clara in the architecture of it. To someone who had spent time with Elizabeth Osei in the weeks before her disappearance. He had said nothing to Damien, he had said nothing to Rosalie. He had said nothing to anyone. Because Elizabeth had asked him not to. Because the woman he had made a promise to in a hospital room 15 years ago had extracted from him, with the specific, clear-eyed certainty of a person who understands that they may not survive to enforce it, a promise that her daughter would be protected, that the name would hold, that Clara would remain dead. And Father Monroe had kept that promise. Every Sunday, every pastoral visit, every cup of tea in his office, with Rosalie sitting across from him and not knowing and him not telling her, and both of them talking about everything except the one thing that connected them. He had kept it for 15 years, and it had cost him something he was only able to name now that it was finally over. Your mother survived the fire. The sentence landed in the room with enormous weight. Rosalie stared at him. She came to me 3 weeks after. She was alive. Badly burned, but alive. Father Monroe told them how Elizabeth had survived. Victor Hale had arrived at the house after receiving a call that something had gone wrong. He had found Elizabeth on the front step, having just come out of the building. She was burning. She recognized him. She knew exactly who he was and what he had done. She shoved him out of the doorway and went back inside for her daughters. Victor had carried her out before the ground floor became impassable. Whatever else he was, and he was many things, very few of them good, he had done that. Elizabeth had survived. And in the hospital, when she understood the full picture, the deliberate nature of the fire, the network of people involved, the compromised evidence she had been building for a year, she had made the only decision that offered her surviving daughter any protection. She had decided to be dead. She had come to Father Monroe with what remained of her strength, and she had told him everything. And then she had disappeared. Into a silence so complete that not even Father Monroe knew where she had gone. Rosalie absorbed this. In pieces, with long pauses between each piece. Her mother had been alive. Her mother had chosen this. To protect her. She knew, with her mind, that this was love. The most costly version of it. The kind that calculates from a hospital bed that the most loving thing it can do is remove itself. She knew this, but knowing something and receiving it are two entirely different operations, and the receiving was not clean. There was grief in it, layers of it. Not only for the death she had mourned for 15 years, but for the life that might have existed. For the 15 years of orphanhood that had not been necessary. For the mornings she had woken up believing herself alone in the world in a particular and permanent way that turned out to be, at least in one direction, untrue. Damien was quiet beside her. He was processing his own version of it. The understanding that the woman who had held his wife's hand in the burns unit was his mother. That his family had been, in the strange, tangled, guilty way of people connected by a disaster they all handled imperfectly. Part of this story from the beginning. The church employee knocked at 11:20, young, pale, with the expression of someone who has just delivered a message they would prefer to undeliver. She described the man waiting downstairs. Older, dark coat, a voice trained by many years in professional environments to remain calm in situations that did not warrant calm. Asking for Clara. Father Monroe's face answered before he spoke. Victor Hale. Rosalie felt the cold move through the room. Not temperature cold. The chill that passes through a space when a name is spoken that should not exist anymore, that belongs to a chapter that was supposed to be permanently closed. Damien stood without a word and positioned himself between Rosalie and the door. The gesture was complete and unhesitating, not dramatic, not performed for the room, simply done. Rosalie took his hand, and they walked toward the chapel. Victor Hale was in his late 60s. He had the posture of a man who had spent decades in boardrooms and still carried the muscle memory of it, even now, when the boardrooms were long gone. He was standing near the altar with rain still dripping from his dark coat. He was looking at the candles, not praying, simply looking, with the quality of attention that belongs to a person who is aware that they are running out of the time required to look at things. He was dying. It was visible in him. The particular thinness, the unhurried quality, the sense of a man who has already had the conversation with himself about what matters and what doesn't, and has simplified accordingly. When he turned and saw Rosalie, his face did the one thing she had not prepared for. It showed grief. Real grief. The kind a person shows when they look directly at the consequence of what they chose, and can no longer find a way to interpret it as anything other than what it is. He said her old name, Clara. Then he said the sentence that restructured everything. Your mother died trying to save me. Victor Hale told the truth, without being asked for it. He had come to the church voluntarily. He had found Rosalie through methods he did not explain in detail. He had learned that Clara Ose was alive and living as Rosalie Mensa and getting married on this day in this chapel. He had come because he was dying. And because he had decided that before he died, he would find every person he had damaged and tell them the truth directly. He had started with Margaret, and then he had come here. The fire on Ashcroft Lane had been his arrangement. He said this plainly, without the softening language that people who have done terrible things normally construct around those things. He and his associates had paid men to enter the property and cause enough damage, enough fear, to convince Elizabeth Ose to drop her legal case before the court hearing. They were not supposed to burn the house with people inside. He had believed, when he gave the instruction, that this distinction mattered. He no longer believed it mattered at all. The men he hired panicked when the fire spread faster than any of them had anticipated. They ran. Victor received a call and drove to the house to find it fully alight. Elizabeth was on the front step. She had just come out. She recognized him. She knew exactly what he represented. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who has already made her decision and does not require his input. Then she shoved him through the front door and turned and went back into the burning building for her children. Victor stood in the rain outside the house he had arranged to have set on fire. And he watched. And he understood, with a completeness that had never left him in the 15 years since, exactly what kind of man he was. He had not known Clara survived. He had believed for 15 years that he was responsible for the deaths of 3 people: Lily, Elizabeth, and Clara. Learning that Elizabeth had lived had not reduced the count exactly. Because the death of Clara, the name, the identity, the childhood, the history, had been real. The burning away of a 16-year-old girl's life had been real, even if the girl herself had survived. He had come to the chapel, in the rain, to look at the person who had survived that and say so. And to give her the only thing he had left to give. Victor Hale reached into his coat pocket. He removed an envelope, worn with years of handling, the corner slightly singed, brown and curled, saved from something. Elizabeth Osei's handwriting was on the front. The old name. Clara. She gave this to me the week before the fire. She said if anything happened to her, I was to find a way to make sure you received it. I have been failing to fulfill that obligation for 15 years. I am fulfilling it now. It is the only thing I have left to offer you. Rosalie's hands were not steady enough. Damien took the envelope gently. He looked at her. She nodded, and he opened it. Rosalie read it aloud. Not for the congregation. Not for anyone watching. Because grief shared has a different quality than grief carried alone in corners. Because her mother had written these words to find their way, and the way had led here, and the here was a wedding chapel with 60 people in it, and she was not going to whisper a word of it. The letter was dated 3 days before the fire. Written in Elizabeth's careful hand, the same hand that had filled school permission slips and birthday cards and the recipe index cards she kept in the green ceramic box in the kitchen. Rosalie found the first line. Her voice was steady, more steady than she expected. My Clara. She stopped. Not dramatically. She needed a moment. Damien held the letter steady in front of her. She found the next line. If you are reading this, it means I could not come back downstairs. Please know that everything I did for you and for Lily, and that I have never once regretted any of it. The candles on the altar kept burning. Someone in the congregation made an involuntary sound. Rosalie kept reading. You are going to spend a long time blaming yourself. I know you. I know how you carry things. I know that the guilt of a survivor is one of the heaviest things a person can hold, and that you will hold it with both hands and refuse to put it down, because putting it down will feel like abandoning the people you lost. She stopped again, because what she had just read was the precise, accurate description of the 15 years she had just lived. Her mother had known. Before any of it happened. She had seen her daughter clearly enough to predict the wound before it was inflicted. And she had written the treatment down and trusted it to find its way. Put it down, Clara. I am telling you to put it down. Not for my sake, not even for yours, but because Lily would not want your survival to be your punishment. She loved you with everything she had, and the way you loved her back, that was real, that was enough. That will always be enough. Rosalie was crying now. She was not trying not to be. She had passed that point several minutes ago without noticing when she had released it. The fire was not your fault. My death, if I do not survive what is coming, is not your fault. There are people in this world who destroy things for money, and they are not worth the guilt that their destruction produces in the people who were simply trying to live their lives. Beside her, Damien exhaled. Long. Controlled. The sound of a man releasing something from his chest that had been there for 15 years. The final paragraph. There is one more thing. I have watched you grow into a girl who hides her light because the world made her afraid of what happens when she is seen. I hope that one day you stop hiding. I hope that someone loves you well enough that you do not need to. And if there is a boy or a man who finds you after all of this is over and who sees your scars and who stays, tell him I said none of this was his fault either. The chapel was completely still. Then, from somewhere in the middle pews, someone began to cry quietly, then someone else. Then the sound moved through the congregation in waves, not hysteria, not performance, just 60 people being moved past the point where composure still felt like a reasonable project. Damien looked at Rosalie. The boy from the rain, she wrote it for me. Rosalie looked at him. She wrote it for you. Damien folded the letter and put it inside his jacket pocket, against his chest, where Rosalie would know it was for the rest of the day. Lily Adaeze Ose was born on a Tuesday in November. She arrived, according to her mother, as though she had somewhere important to be, and was already mildly irritated by the inconvenience of being born at all. She had the gap between her front teeth from the very beginning. Elizabeth said this proved that personality came in with the bones. She was the kind of child who adopted causes. At 6, the cause was earthworms. She had decided that earthworms were systematically mistreated and underappreciated by the human population, and she relocated every earthworm she encountered from pavements to soil with the focused determination of a person who has identified a problem and intends to solve it personally. At 7, the cause was fairness in sandwiches. She had a specific, articulate objection to sandwiches cut on the wrong axis, and would explain this objection at whatever length was required to whoever offered her one. At length, with evidence. At 8, she became deeply interested in weather. Not the way children are usually interested in weather. In the serious, studied way. She watched the forecast every evening. She had opinions about cloud formations and the difference between a squall and a shower. She could tell, she claimed, when it was going to thunder by the quality of the air. And yet, thunderstorms terrified her. This was the essential thing about Lily. She was the bravest coward anyone had ever met. Curious about exactly the things that frightened her. Frightened of them anyway. Advancing toward them regardless. Clara had loved her sister with the specific, slightly exasperated, entirely unconditional love of an older sibling who has been looked up to since before they were old enough to understand what that meant. She had not understood, while Lily was alive, how much of herself she had been building around the fact of her sister's existence. You do not see the architecture of your own life until one of the walls is gone. In the chapel. In the hour between the hook and the yes, Rosalie let herself think about Lily more clearly than she had in years. The strawberry shampoo. The earthworm campaigns. The diagonal sandwiches. The word particularly, with its extra self-invented syllable, applied to things that did not require it, simply because she liked the sound of it. The night of the fire. Lily shaking her arm in the smoke. The small hand gripping hers as they moved toward the window. The moment the ceiling came down between them. The arms pulling her backward. The sound of her sister's voice calling her name from inside the burning house. She had spent 15 years believing Lily's last memory of her was watching her older sister disappear through a window. And then Damien had told her. Lily had been calling for her. Not screaming in terror. Not calling for anyone or anything general. Calling for Clara. Wanting her specifically. Right up until the end. Rosalie had not known in 15 years how much she needed that. She knew now. 3 weeks after the wedding, Damien drove her back to the city where she grew up. He waited by the car while she crossed the cemetery grass alone. She stood at the small stone marker with Lily's name on it for a long time. She spoke out loud, which she had never done at a grave. She told her sister she was sorry. Not because she believed any longer that what happened was her fault. She was working on releasing that belief, slowly, with a therapist who was good at this specific kind of work. The releasing was going, it was going slowly, but it was going. She told Lily she was sorry because Lily deserved an apology from someone. Because she was 9 years old and she died in a fire set by adults willing to burn a family alive for land. She told her about Damien, that he reads with one foot tucked under him and becomes unreachable for the duration. That he would have liked her. Then Rosalie stood in the sunshine with the left side of her face uncovered, and she let the light find her and she did not move away from it. And she stayed. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from hiding something. Not the physical tiredness of a long day, not the mental fatigue of difficult work. A different kind entirely. The kind that accumulates so slowly over such a long period that the person carrying it eventually stops recognizing it as exhaustion at all. It becomes their baseline. They begin to believe that this particular level of tiredness is simply what being alive feels like. Rosalie had believed this for 15 years. Standing in the chapel with Damien's hand against her face, She felt the weight of 15 years become visible to her all at once, the way a mountain becomes visible when you reach a height you have not been at before. It was an enormous amount of weight. The 30-minute routine, every single morning, the precise management of light and photography, the friendships kept deep but never deep enough. The men who got close and were then, imperceptibly but reliably, held at a specific distance from the last room. The swimming pools avoided. The morning sunshine that she arranged not to land on the left side of her face. The casual moments, photographs, strangers in good lighting, any situation that might involve the left side of her face being seen without warning. All of it. Every day. For 15 years. An extraordinary expenditure of energy. Spent on the management of a secret that had found its way out anyway. This morning, at her own wedding, through an accident involving a compact and a careless elbow. The universe, it turned out, had its own timeline. The emotional healing that begins on a day like this one is not clean. It does not arrive as simple relief. It does not feel the way the endings of emotional drama stories feel, where the truth is told and everyone is lighter for it, and the light comes through the windows at the right angle. And everything resolves. Or rather, the light did come through the windows at the right angle. It was doing this right now. Through the stained glass above the altar, falling in pieces of amber and blue across the chapel floor. The light was doing exactly what light does when it has been given a good stage. But the feeling was not clean. It was enormous and layered. Grief for Lily. Always for Lily. Grief for her mother, not the death she had mourned for 15 years, but the loss of the version of the life that might have existed. The one where her mother was alive and she knew it. Guilt beginning for the first time to loosen. Not all at once, not dramatically, but moving, and under all of it something smaller and more private. The relief of a burn scar survivor who has been seen, fully seen, real face and all, and not been left. Victor Hale had said that Elizabeth Osei was braver than anyone he had known. Standing in the chapel, Rosalie thought about what brave had actually looked like in her mother's case. Not the moment at the door. Though that was brave in a way that requires no argument. The other kind. The quiet, sustained, daily kind. The kind that decides, from a hospital bed, that the most loving thing it can do is disappear. That survives the grief of that decision. That writes a letter and hands it to the wrong man and trusts, across 15 years of silence, that it will find the person it was written for. Rosalie had spent 15 years thinking of herself as a burn scar survivor who had changed her name and hidden her face and kept the world at a manageable distance. She had never thought of herself as her mother's daughter. She was beginning to understand these might be the same thing. Father Monroe stood. He looked at both of them. "We can proceed whenever you are ready. There is no wrong answer about when." Rosalie looked at Damien. Damien looked at Rosalie. He asked the question quietly. "Do you still want to marry me?" She genuinely thought about it. Not as a dramatic pause, not as a performance for the 60 people in the pews, as an actual consideration of an actual question. She thought about Damien, the everyday version. The man who reads with one foot tucked under him and becomes completely unreachable for the duration. The man who lost his temper once, badly, and then spent 2 days correcting for it with such methodical care, it became almost comic. The man who had never, in 3 years, asked about the morning routine. Who had accepted without comment or question every arrangement she made around light and cameras and left-side angles. Who had watched and noticed and waited because he understood, without being told, that she was not ready to tell him. And who had chosen, out of love, to wait. Even if waiting meant the revelation came not over a quiet dinner, but in a wedding chapel with 60 people watching, and a man in a wet coat, and a letter from a woman who had been gone for 15 years. She thought about the scars. She thought about her mother's letter on the table. "I hope someone loves you well enough that you do not need to hide." This was the answer. Her mother had been waiting 15 years to deliver it, through a worn envelope held by a dying man at an altar in the rain. Rosalie looked at Damien. Yes, not loudly, clearly. Without the makeup, without the name, without the 30 minutes of daily management and the 15 years of careful distance, just yes. And the chapel exhaled. Father Monroe performed the ceremony, shorter than planned. The elaborate program was set aside. There was only the essential thing, the vows. Damien said his without notes, looking at her face. The full face, both sides, the left side with its scars fully visible in the morning light. He did not look away. Not once. Rosalie said hers. Her voice shook on the second sentence and was steady after that. The rings. The words. The kiss. The kind that happens when two people have been through something large together and have come out the other side and cannot quite believe what the air feels like now. 60 people stood. The sound that came from them was not polished ceremony applause. It was the raw, involuntary kind. The sound of people responding to truth. The rain stopped sometime during the ceremony. Nobody noticed the exact moment. These things do not announce themselves. But when Rosalie and Damien walked out of the church, the street was wet and bright and the May sunshine had returned quietly, without ceremony, as May sunshine does after a morning storm. The photographs from that morning show a woman in a white dress with the left side of her face uncovered. The burn scars are visible in every single photograph, because Rosalie had walked toward the chapel without covering them. No dramatic decision. She had simply looked at the makeup bag on the vanity table and left it there. And walked, and let the morning be what it was. There are things Rosalie knows now that Clara did not know on Ashcroft Lane. She knows her mother survived and made a choice that cost everything. Because the alternative cost more. She knows the letter was written 3 days before the fire by a woman who knew her daughter well enough to prescribe the treatment for a wound not yet inflicted. She knows that Damien stood at a window at 15 years old, with a phone in his hand and was stopped, and has carried that every day since. She knows his father died in the slow, quiet way of a man who chose guilt over confession. She knows Margaret sat beside her hospital bed for 2 days with steady hands. She knows Father Monroe held a secret for 15 years because a woman he respected asked him to, and he could not find a way to say no. She knows Victor Hale drove through rain to a wedding chapel he had no right to enter because he was dying and could no longer carry the weight of what he had been carrying. She knows all of this now. And she holds it. Not as a dramatic love story about betrayal and forgiveness and hidden identities finally revealed. As her actual life. Complicated and layered and expensive in ways that do not appear in summaries. And worth it. Completely worth it. The burn scars are still there. They will always be there. Rosalie is not going to claim she no longer notices them. That would not be true, and this story has no space left for anything untrue. She notices them every morning. She sits at the vanity mirror, she opens the makeup bag. Some mornings she uses it, and some mornings she doesn't. Both mornings belong to her. Both choices are hers to make. That is what the letter gave her. Not freedom from the scars. Freedom from the obligation to perform around them. The freedom to decide each morning what she wants to carry, and to put down what she does not. The people who truly love you do not look away from your scars. They learn the story behind them, and they stay. Elizabeth Osei knew this. She wrote it down 3 days before everything she feared came true. She trusted it to a man who did not deserve her trust because she had no better option, and she understood people well enough to know that guilt in sufficient quantities eventually produces action. She was right. The letter found its way, right on time,